Seniors, wanted to pivot back before the midterm to the Chapter 26 homework because I know we kind of left that hanging and we ran out of time in the in-person space in the class time. So we didn't really get a good explanation of what completed Chapter 26 homework assignment looked like. So now I tried to set up this PowerPoint where would use like an animation where it would not reveal certain cells of the spreadsheet until I clicked again. But it didn't isolate the individual cell of the spreadsheet. It failed to like reveal the entire spreadsheet for the slide until I clicked. So there's a fundamental flaw in how the animation software works within PowerPoint. So as you jump to the next slide, you're going to see all the answers that I calculated. But if you don't stick around and listen, you won't figure out how I got there. So just a grain of salt. So let's get going here. It is. Here's all the answers. Now, how the hell did I get those? Okay, so this follows exercise 26-1 that's on page 398. PA to lateral skull, lateral facial bones to PA facial bones, AP cervical spine to oblique cervical spine, barium minima AP to 35-degree oblique sigmoid, PA chest to lateral chest, Towns to AP abdomen, PA wrist to AP elbow, AP knee to AP shoulder. Now, in order to solve the technique conversion, you have to go back to his proportional anatomy cheat sheet that you'll find on pages 394 and 395. So walking through that first one, PA skull, if you go to section B on the cheat sheet on page 395, you see PA Caldwell skull is a certain technique, and that's equal to 2 times a lateral skull. So therefore, a lateral skull is half of a PA Caldwell. And so what would you do? How would you, so when he says half technique or 3 times, it's most of the time it's the change in mass, but then you have to decide whether you're actually changing mass or you're going to stack some 15% rules. And there's some, you can see that there's some places where the 15% rule makes more sense. So as we go through this table, so the real change, if you're going to go from a PA skull, you got a good PA skull technique, but now you want to shoot a lateral skull, cut your mass in half. And that's the only change you have to make. So the real change, the modification is half the technique, but that manifests as half the mass. You don't have to adjust the KB. Okay. Lateral facial bones. Okay. So he doesn't list lateral facial bones, but what he does list is lateral sinuses. Lateral sinuses are 1/3 of PA projection. So PA facial bones, I put those at 3 times the lateral facial bones because that's what it is for sinuses. Now, do you want to use 3 times the mass for the face? No, you're going to expose the eyeballs to too much radiation. What you should rather do, instead of multiplying the mass by 3, that's a 1.5 step, 15% rule increase. So doubling the mass is a singular 15% rule increase, and then you're going to add 8% to that, which is another half step. Okay, and again, I got there from his listing of the lateral sinus on that same table that's on page 395. Lateral sinus equal to 1/3 of a PA. Okay, moving on to the AP C-spine to the oblique C-spine. Let's see if we can find that. He's got extremities, he's got trunk. Does he talk about the C-spine? Cervical spine, he's got them in group 2 on the previous page, all cervical spine views in group 2, and it's the same as the APC spine. So that means, and there it is, in section E, extremities, etc. Cervical spine AP, all right? Obliques, lateral, and odontoid all equal to the AP. So therefore, you use the same technique. Okay. So equal, no change. Okay. All right. Now a BE, AP projection, and then a 30-degree oblique sigmoid. Okay. I took it to a 40-degree or 45-degree, but let me see where I came to that. See how it says in section A of the cheat sheet on 395, AP abdomen, and then it says 45-degree obliques on all above is 2 times the AP. Well, it would be the same for obliquing barium minima. It's still a 2-time factor increase. Increase your KVP by 15%. Leave your mass the same. Because again, you don't want to overdose your patient. Okay. PHS to a lateral chest. He's got that written in section C, right? 3 to 4 times the PA. The common double the mass and increase the KVP by 10 gives you the equivalent of 2 doublings, which is 4 times. So that would be the real world change you would make going from a PA chest technique to a lateral chest technique. Double your mass and add 10 KVP. Okay. Town skull and AP abdomen, he has those as equivalent in section B on that same table on 395. PA wrist, AP elbow, he has that relationship under both the wrist and the elbow, which is on the extremities column on the right side of the page under E. It's about halfway down the page. Elbow is 2 times the wrist, and then 2 entries down past the forearm, wrist is 1/2 the elbow. Okay, so if you're changing from a wrist to an elbow, just double your technique, which again 15% increase is probably most effective. AP knee to AP shoulder. He's got that under the shoulder adjustment. Shoulder equals C-spine, comma, equals knee plus 8 KVP. So if you have an AP knee technique and you add 8 KVP to it, you have a shoulder technique. Okay. Lower leg versus lower leg in the cast. Typically we're working with a plaster, it's a plaster cast adjustment is what we're looking at, and that's 2 times the mass. Okay. Most of that mass is going to be absorbed by the plaster cast. So it doesn't, a 15% rule change doesn't really save the patient dose. The extra photons, the double the number of photons that you're sending are actually being absorbed by the plaster cast. So it doesn't matter if you do the 15% rule or not. Adult skull to infant skull, he's got that under pediatrics. I used a 1-year-old, and it's half the adult skull technique, which would be half the mass. AP foot to lateral foot, double your mass. AP ankle to lateral ankle, very much like what was that previous one. The C-spine, all C-spine techniques are the same, all ankle techniques are the same. So that's how we did that one. Okay. And then again, that was based on exercise 26-1 on page 398. So let's advance to our next slide. This is the variable mass technique chart that you had to fill out. I think this is in the, this is exercise 26-2. That's on page 404. Okay, now it gives you 24 mass, But then he wants you to use the proportional anatomy chart and the variable thickness rules to flesh out. So the only number he gives you is lumbar spine AP, 80 kV, 24 mass for an average part thickness of 22 centimeters. Okay, so the first thing you got to figure out is if I step down 4 centimeters down to 18, what should I be doing with the mass? And that was in the reading previously. A change of 4 centimeters, you half the mass. So that's why 18 is 12 mass. 18 centimeters is 12 mass because that's half of 24 mass. And then 20 centimeters is halfway between those two numbers. So halfway between 18 or between 12 and 24 is 18. Okay. And so by now we can see the pattern. It's stepwise by 6. And so therefore 24 plus 6 is 30, and then 30 plus 6 is 36. Okay. So we get decreases in mass for lower thickness than average, increases in mass for greater thickness than average. Now the only thing we got to do is get the nominal mass for the normal thickness. That is that very middle column right there, where it goes 24, 36, 96, 16, 8, 8, and 6. Where did those numbers come from? Well, lumbar spine oblique. Let's go back to proportional anatomy. Okay. So if I go to proportional anatomy, the lumbar spine oblique is a 45-degree oblique. Okay. So 2 times the AP. Okay. Or for a 30-degree oblique, 1.5 times the AP. It looks like I went 1.5 times the AP. And that might have been based on his own technique chart and what change I saw him make. So his technique chart with variable mass, if you go to his 45-degree oblique, right, he's got a 20, which is 2 times what he's using for the AP. Okay. So I don't know why I put 36 in there. 36 is 1.5 times. Okay. So that should be 48. But I put 36, so I'm going to just stick with what I got. Okay. So then scaling it down, remember when we lose 4 centimeters of thickness, we half the mass. Okay. So down to 22, that's 18 mass because that's half of 36. And then we don't quite double the mass getting up to 30, but we're increasing by 9 each time as you go through. So 18 and 36, halfway between those is 27, which is 9 times 3. 36 is 9 times 4. So 28 centimeters would be 9 times 5, that's 45. And then 30 centimeters would be 9 times 6, which is 54. Okay, so it follows, the ratcheting follows the 9 times tables. That's how I did that one. Okay, the lateral technique, he's using 80 kV, 96 mass. Now, where did I get that from? He went from, on his technique chart for variable mass, he went from 10 to 40. So that would be like 4 times the mass. So 4 times 24 is 96. Okay. And then half of 96 is 48. And then halfway between those two is 72. Right. And then if you keep that stepwise increase, what is that? It's 24 each time? Yeah, 24 each time. So 24 plus 96 is 120, and then 24 more is 144. Okay? So what you have there is the 24 times tables. Right? Skull AP technique. Where did I get the 16 from? Well, again, go to the proportional anatomy chart that you find on 395, okay, versus a lumbar spine AP, which is the equivalent of the AP abdomen. What is the skull? The skull, PA or AP, is 2/3 the abdomen. So take 24 times 2, that's 48, divided by 3, that's 16. 2/3 of the abdomen technique, okay? Or 2/3 of the lumbar spine technique. So our baseline for this one is 16 for average habitus, and then we cut that for the skinniest habitus, 15 centimeters. We cut the mass in half, that's 8. And then for the middle number, we split the difference between 8 and 16, and that's 12, and that shows us our increment. It's an increase in 4 every step. So 16 increases to 20, because 16 plus 4 is 20, and then 20 plus 4 is 24. And then we filled out that one. So we're more than halfway done now with completing the table. Where did we get the 8 from? Well, the lateral skull is half of the PA technique or the AP technique. So just start out with your mass cut in half. And again, we're doing the same thing. The 11 centimeter technique is going to be half of the normal technique, which is 8. Half of 8 is 4. In between 4 and 8 is exactly halfway between 4 and 8 is 6, right? And so now we figure out the step is 2 mass for every change in thickness. So 17 centimeters becomes 10 and 19 centimeters becomes 12. AP shoulder is supposed to be the exact same as, I think, a lateral skull. So let's look over there. Shoulder equals, over there on the right-hand column under section E, extremities. Shoulder equals C-spine equals knee plus 8 equals 1/2 PA skull, which is how we formulated the technique for the lateral skull. So the numbers are exactly the same as the lateral skull. You can shoot a shoulder with exactly the same technique as you can a lateral skull. Okay. Measurements slightly different, but same technique. Measurements are only off by 1 centimeter between the two parts. You see that? So not a significant difference. And then finally, the knee AP. What does it tell us in the proportional anatomy chart? Do we have a good knee? Knee is 2 times an ankle. It's a PHS minus 10, or it's equal to an AP shoulder minus 8. Okay. So the knee comes in at 70 kVp, and it said it was a shoulder minus 8 kVp. So we've subtracted 6 kVp. So it's almost the same mass as the shoulder AP above. I just trimmed it to like 3/4 of the mass of the shoulder because we already we were supposed to trim 8 kVp. We only trimmed 6 kVp. So 6 kVp and 3/4 of the original mass, that's effectively an 8 kVp trim. So that's how, you wouldn't have been able to guess that, but it's, now that you see how I did that, it makes sense. Okay, so 8 becomes 6, that's 3/4 of 8 is 6, and then half of 6 is 3, so that's our skinniest thickness is 3 mass. Halfway between 3 and 6 is 4.5, and then the increment is plus 1.5 each time, so then 7.5, and then finally 9, and that finishes this table. So that's your variable mass exercise 26-2 at the back of the chapter. Let's go on to, I think 26-3 is 26-3, so this is variable kVp. And again, both of those have their, just a straight variable kV and a straight variable mass chart. They have their weaknesses. The best is a hybrid chart, which is the last exercise. Okay. Let me go ahead to 26-3. Okay. 26-3 variable kV, the only kV it gives us is 96 kVp for an AP lumbar spine. Okay, and again we go to the proportional anatomy chart, and it says 2 times for a lateral. It's 2 times, so I think that's either 2 times or 4 times. So it's 2 15% increases. That's how we got to 122. And that third column down at 30 centimeters, third row down, lumbar spine lateral, 122 kV. Okay. Halfway between those two is about 110 kV. That's one step up, 15% rule change up from the 96 gives you about 110 kV. So that's how we went from the AP to the oblique and the lateral. The oblique is a 15% rule increase, and the lateral is 15% rule increases. Okay. When we lose 4 centimeters of thickness, let's go back to the AP row. So 96 is for 22 centimeters, but how did I get the 84 at 18 centimeters? That was, I think it was a single, yeah, that was a single 15% rule decrease. So a 4 centimeter loss is a down change by 15%. So that becomes 84. A half step for a 2 centimeter loss is halfway between 84 and 96, which would be 90. Okay. So then the increment becomes +6 every time, and then we completely destroy that. So 15% rule increase at 26 centimeters is 110, and then splitting that difference between 96 and 110 is about 102, 101, 102. Okay, going to the oblique, the 98 is a 15% decrease, 126 is a 15% increase, 126, 122, and then splitting the difference between 98 and 110 for the 24 centimeter, and splitting the difference between 110 and 126, the halfway point is about 118. Okay. Moving on to the lateral, again, 15% decrease from 122 is 110. That's how we get the 26 centimeter one. And then 15% increase, and it's got an asterisk there. 15% increase from 122 is technically 140, but does your machine actually go that high? So that's why there's an asterisk there. Oh, not all machines, Siemens machines can do that, but not all machines. Like notoriously, Philips generator tops out at about 130 typically. So you don't see a 140 kVp technique for all the machines by all the manufacturers. So just watch out for that. It might be that you just max the technique out and then start increasing mass to make up for that. Okay. Moving on to the skull. And again, how do we get to the 64? We got to go back to that 96 for an AP lumbar spine technique, right? And let's go back to the proportional anatomy. The skull is going to be 2/3 of the abdomen technique, which is the equivalent of the AP lumbar spine. So 2/3 of 96 is 64 kV, okay? And then a 15% rule drop for the 15 centimeter, the lowest one is 52. 15% rule increased for the 23 is 80, and then 58 and 72 split the difference between the lowest and the highest of those. Okay. For the lateral, I think we do it as a half technique of the AP or PA skull. So it's a 15% rule decrease. 64 drops to 55 kV. That might be a little low for a lateral skull. And then we do a 15% rule. You don't want to go below 50 though. So the 13 centimeter and the 11 centimeter, you really Most of your machines don't run that low. Some of the newer ones, maybe you run into the 40s with that, but that's really, really low penetration. I would caution you to don't drop my recommendation is never drop your kVp below 50, even for the smallest body parts. So, and then 15% rule increase from 55 is up to 60. Oh, that's weird. Should be 63 in the outer. No, so that's an error on my part. Should be 63 should be the 19 centimeter one. 60 should be the 17 centimeter one. I apologize. I got those numbers backwards. Okay. Our shoulder AP is the same as the AP skull. So those numbers match up exactly with the AP skull, similar to what we saw in the variable mass technique chart. And then the knee matches up with the lateral skull very nicely. Okay. See, oh, it looks like, so maybe the thickest skull technique at 19 centimeters, that might be supposed to be 72 kVp, not 60 kVp. So just note that. But you can see how I started with a 96 and I went through all of these. Just going back to the proportional anatomy cheat sheet, I was able to derive the techniques for the rest of the chart just from that first single number and based on the adjustment that they recommended in the chart on page 395. So now we go to the hybrid one. Let's see if we can slide of the homework assignment, and I didn't even do the calculations all the way out. So for the hybrid chart, we have 90 at 10, 90 kVp at 10 mass for an AP lumbar spine, and we want to know, so that's for 22 centimeters of thickness. If we only measure 18 centimeters of thickness, how do we adjust that? Well, remember the hybrid chart, if the body part is thinner, we're decreasing mass, but if the body part gets thicker, we're increasing kVp. And overall, we're going to be able to conserve dose for the patient no matter which way we make the adjustment. So, and again, the rule follows. So when we saw a 4 centimeter loss in the previous chart for variable mass, what do we do with the mass from the routine? We cut it in half. So 10 mass is cut down to 5 mass, and then halfway between 10 and 5 is 7.5. So that's where those two numbers come from, right? What did we do for an increase of 4 centimeters? We did a single 15% rule increase. So, and I didn't even do the calculation, but it would 90 times 15% would be about 12.5. So you're looking at about 103, 104 kVp at 10 mass for that 26 centimeter. Okay. And then you can just follow the logic down. Once you see how I did the first one, have the optimal technique for sthenic habitus right there in the third column over. You just you ratchet the mass down for smaller thicknesses, half the mass for 4 centimeter loss, right? And then you ratchet the kVp up by 15% rule increase for a plus 4 centimeter increase in thickness, okay? And all of the rest of the rows follow the same way. So I hope that clarifies what the objective of the assignment was. I know it was kind of, the launch of this class was a little tricky with senior breakfast, but I think senior breakfast is important. So it gets a little tricky with a recorded lecture and then a big confusing homework assignment. I understand it, but hopefully this PowerPoint has kind of pulled the veil back, and hopefully you've actually listened to the whole thing rather than just writing down the numbers that I have listed on the slides, so that you actually understand how to craft a technique chart. Not that you'll ever apply that skill, but it's important that if you do the exercise, then you understand the rules for creating a technique chart better, and so you have better familiarity with technique charts for when they come up on the registry. So I do encourage you, if you gave up on the exercise, you didn't complete it because you were confused, listen to this whole thing and then take another crack at it, okay? And I will be checking those for completion. So flesh those out. And if you've already done it and you got it completely wrong, show me the completely wrong one first. Don't overwrite it. Like, don't make the corrections on it. Show me the completely wrong one so that I can see you did, put some elbow grease into it, um, a little bit of sweat and backbone into it. And then show me the one that I walked you through with the correct answers if you got completely confused. And hopefully you didn't get that far confused, and if you did, hopefully this PowerPoint helped you out a little bit. So anyway, rambling on, you got a test tomorrow on CT, and I will see you guys then. And I did remember just yesterday that I forgot to record the last CT slide, so let me pivot to that, and I'll upload both of these to Schoology. See you later, guys.